Welcome to Being Authentic AF. I'm Alexis Franzese, a university professor, licensed psychologist, speaker, consultant, and mom with over 20 years of experience studying authenticity. This season explores what it means to express your authenticity and to express it authentically in your work, art, and everyday life. It's for anyone who wants their voice and presence to align with their values and seeks to deepen connections with others, from audiences to colleagues. Through reflections and conversations with creators across different mediums, we'll share practical ways to put your inner work into motion. You'll hear about actionable frameworks for authentic self-expression, and we'll explore themes like intent versus impact, honoring the medium, vulnerability with boundaries, access and context, and why iteration beats perfection. Join me as we explore how to know yourself, be yourself, and evolve yourself, and then express it and keep expressing it, unlocking the path to truly being authentic AF. Welcome to Season 2 of Being Authentic AF. I'm your host, Dr. Alexis Franzese. This season is all about authenticity and expression, both expressing our authenticity and authentically expressing ourselves. I'm here today with Dr. Shanetta Pendleton. Shanetta is an assistant professor of strategic communications at Elon University. I'm excited to have Shanetta here today because she's also an authenticity researcher. Her research focuses on authenticity and relationships, with particular attention to how organizations use social media to build and sustain meaningful relationships with minority audiences. Her scholarship offers public relations practitioners and educators evidence-based insights into building authentic relationships with our audiences. Shanetta, I am so happy to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Okay, so this is the first time I've had another authenticity researcher on the show, and I'm really, really excited for this conversation. I want to start by asking you how you started studying authenticity.
Oh, that's a loaded question. So for me, it was really more so about looking into public relations and seeing brands advocate for social political causes, especially related to like Black Lives Matter, and just feeling like everybody's jumping on a bandwagon because it's the cool thing to do. So I really wanted to see how other people were perceiving it. Like, were they perceiving it as being authentic? And also if it was effective in terms of building relationships or even affecting the organization's brand and their reputation and how they portray themselves to their audiences. So that's really the root of the research, just really figuring out how it kind of moderates the relationship management process, especially in organization public relationships.
And so it's clear in listening to you that this has been a big part of your professional and scholarly agenda. But when did you first start thinking about authenticity in your own life?
Probably when I started working in higher education full time. So that was around 26, so super late. Mainly because I've always been a loner. Like, I never really fit in anywhere because I was always a little weird. And I was okay with that because I don't like people. So I was like, it's fine. Like, I will just do my own thing, and people who gravitate toward it will, and people who won't. And I'm okay with that because I also had a big family. So my cousins were my first friends. So I wasn't pressed for friends. So when I started working in higher education, things were a little different because we always feel like a professor should behave a certain way.
Right.
And I started teaching full time when I was 26. And I was like, okay, I think I went through that whole imposter syndrome phase where it's like, I have to be a certain way, you know? And it didn't feel right for me. It made it harder for me to fit myself in a box that wasn't necessarily for me. And so easily I just shifted gears because I wasn't doing it my way. And when I don't do it my way, it doesn't feel as good. Mm-hmm. And I also realized that it wasn't worth it to try to fit myself in the box. So I just started operating in a way that was naturally me because I felt like that was what was best for my students, especially my students of color. Mm-hmm. So my Black students, to see that they could come into these spaces and be themselves. And also for my students who are white, because they could see that there are people who are different from you who still have things in common with you, okay? Also, how do you talk to and understand people who you don't necessarily have the opportunity to be around a lot? So I started teaching in the Midwest and in Indiana, and I randomly asked my class, I was like, what is it about people in Muncie, Indiana? When I go in stores, they act like they've never seen a black person before. And one of my students was like, well, we drove our tractors to school. We haven't. Like, where I'm from, we didn't have a lot of black people in our community or in our neighborhood. So we're not used to seeing a lot of black people or interacting with them. And when you think about it, how do you train someone to be a communicator when they don't know how to communicate with people who weren't in their neighborhoods?
Right.
And so I do that best by showing up as my authentic self in those classroom spaces.
Wow. And how do you define authenticity? I want to know about how you define it professionally and in your work, but before that, tell me about how you think about it personally and then switch to the professional definition.
So personally, for me, it's just always operating in a way that aligns with my values. So always showing up as a version of myself and being confident and comfortable with the way that I'm showing up. And that's more of an internal thing, but even how I present myself. So making sure that I don't like to whitewash myself, especially not in higher education. So I'm confident in how I decide to wear my hair, how I decide to dress, how I decide to wear my earrings that day, you know. Professionally, I'm really looking at brands in terms of authenticity, and it's really interesting because for a brand, it's that brand showing their words actually truly align, their actions truly align with their words and their mission and what they claim their values are. So not just them saying that they support a certain cause, but them also putting things behind it, showing consistency in terms of supporting Black Lives Matter even when it's not cool, you know, even when it's not the hot topic. So really showing an extended commitment to those causes and also being able to have that align with their mission.
So you study how audiences authentically communicate with diverse audiences. When you're assessing that, what factors you count on to determine whether something feels authentic versus just being optics? I know you hinted at that a little bit. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, so in my last study, I was really using a scale that focused on like 5 dimensions. So are they being true to itself, or do the people perceive them as being authentic or showing a sustained commitment to a cause? So in order to narrow things down, I used a fictitious company, and then I did change some of the language in the messaging. So they were Instagram posts, and some of them just showed statements of solidarity. So I labeled those like rhetorical statements. And then financial commitments, non-financial commitments, meaning that they just partner with a nonprofit organization. And then there was corporate practice posts where they actually showed what they were doing as a corporation to address those issues internally. So I was really trying to figure out, okay, everybody can give money. Do people care about that? Do they perceive that as being authentic? You know, everybody can tweet Black Lives Matter. We stand with Black Lives Matter. Over 950 brands, I think, participated in Blackout Tuesday for George Floyd in 2020. So that takes a second. What are you actually doing to show that you care and that this is a part of your brand's values and identity? And for me, I thought the corporate practice post would be the most authentic or perceived as the most authentic, but that was not the case at all, actually. They actually still found the partnerships with nonprofits as being the most authentic. So basically, those non-financial commitments, which in a way showed us that we don't see the money as a heavy lift. All right. So of course, these companies have billions of dollars. If they give $1 million or donate $1 million to NAACP, that's great. But is that really showing a sustained commitment to the cause? Is that showing your authentic commitment to whatever cause that you're supporting?
So the relationships with partner organizations were bigger contributors to the perception of authenticity than just a donation.
Yes. Yeah. So the donations was actually the lowest of the total poll, actually. So that was really interesting for me, but also like even trying to narrow down the measurements for authenticity, especially in our field. So looking at communication, how do we know if something is authentic? So for instance, I used fictitious brands in that experiment because we know that if you know the brand, then you know what they've been doing over time. So if I say Target right now, then you would have feelings about them, especially as it relates to social political activism. And what I really want to see is how do we narrow that down and kind of understand what do we perceive as authenticity, especially when we have technology in the middle. Okay, so we're not face to face with these companies. We don't necessarily what they do on a day-to-day basis. We don't know all of their employees. So how do we look at a message and determine that it's authentic? So that is really where I want my research to go, into really digging deep in the measurement of authenticity, especially perceived authenticity in terms of messages, and really figuring out what does the body do when they come across an authentic message. So looking at that psychophysiological response to authentic messages, because right now, if we ask someone, so I did ask in survey, like, how do you know this is authentic? Well, they said they were going to do this, but what does it feel like? Even when you ask somebody, how do you know this person is being authentic? Well, they felt like they were being real. They felt like they were being genuine. It's a feeling, but what is that feeling? How do we quantify or even solidify that true feeling that happens in humans when they come across a message, especially when that message is coming from a brand or coming through a channel that we can't necessarily control all the time?
It's so interesting to hear it from your disciplinary perspective and contrasting that with my own background in sociology and psychology. And I'm thinking about the distinction between authenticity and sincerity, with authenticity oftentimes being thought of as self-referential even, and sincerity being kind of more of that interactive exchange. Do you distinguish between authenticity and sincerity in your work, or what do you make of that distinction?
That's a really interesting question, actually. I have not, in my work, talked about sincerity. And the interesting part about that is I don't know if I always feel like brands are always sincere. Because this is a complicated part of authenticity, especially as it relates to like corporations. Everybody's worried about the bottom line. Okay, every company cares about the money. So how do we figure out what is authentic in the work that they do if they weren't necessarily built to sustain those causes? So say, for instance, Ben and Jerry's, it's easy to talk about them as being authentic because what they do is a part of their mission. All right. So in terms of social activism, social justice movements, that's built and baked into their mission. These other companies, we don't really know. We don't know if they're just pandering to an audience, if it's woke washing, or if they actually have a commitment. So I think sincerity would be actually harder to measure in terms of perceived authenticity of corporate messaging.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting dimension to think through, though, that perceived authenticity and perceived sincerity, thinking about both of those constructs and what they might offer, and how people, the different metrics people use to evaluate each.
Maybe sincerity would be what you are willing to sacrifice. Like, I think sometimes sincerity is a self-sacrifice type of, I don't want to say it like that, but
all these ideas are swirling now. I can feel it. I can feel it.
Yeah, if you're sincere about something, you're not considering the bottom line. You're not considering what the company might lose.
It has something about motivation at stake in it.
You are genuinely operating in a sincere way, in a way that you feel is right at that time, not considering those other factors that may be at play. And I don't think companies have the freedom to do that, if that makes sense.
Right, because of the bottom line demands.
Yes, because of their stakeholders and investors and things like that.
Yeah. All right, so I know you do a lot with relationship management theory. Tell us what that is and how it comes up in your work.
So the relationship management theory is one of the oldest theories of public relations. It's really focusing on the relationships and the dimensions of those relationships that people have with companies and their publics. So really looking at trust, commitment, genuineness. So really looking at those dimensions and understanding that a lot of times those relationships that you have will dictate how they respond to certain messages. All right. So we easily accept messages from people that we like just because we like that person. It doesn't matter what they may be saying, but we like them. So it's easy for us to internalize the message and treat it as facts. However, if it's somebody that we don't like, they could be saying something that is absolute truth, and we're still going to look it up just in case. Like,
everything is suspect if you don't like the
yes.
person.
So in PR, relationships really dictate your ability to bounce back from even a crisis. So if a company you like messes up their product one time, or if your phone, or if you're an Apple user, all of a sudden starts to glitch, but you have a commitment to Apple and the blue bubbles, then you're more likely to just write it off as a one-off and go pay for another one. However, if you go to a new brand that you didn't want to go to anyway, and it messes up, the first thing you say is, oh, I knew I should have never went to Samsung. Like, I knew that this was going to be crap, because we already have this negative association with this brand. So it's easy for us to accept those negative messages. It's really very closely related to cognitive dissonance in psychology. Yeah. So super related, or super correlated with that. Absolutely. So relationship management really is the center of public relations, understanding that if we want people to have a connection to our brand, we have to learn how to manage relationships with them. So even when I teach my students about relationship management, I'm explaining to them it's no different from the relationships that you have with a person. All right. So if you have a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a spouse, partner, if that person is not holding up their end of the bargain, if the relationship feels unbalanced, you do what you can to bring balance in. If that person is not operating in a way that's consistent, that is in alignment with what you think they should be doing, you either get out of that relationship or find a new relationship, or you try to talk to them to figure out, okay, how can we bring balance? And if they do it, then you guys work through that. If they don't do it, then you have to consider if that's a relationship you want to continue to be in. And so it's the same thing that people do when we talk about companies and relationships, especially in a market where we have so many options. All right. So if this product is no longer serving me, then there's competition. All right. So how do we make sure that this person has a true connection, a strong relationship with this brand, that they don't want to go to the off-brand Kleenex? They need the Kleenex with the K. You know? And so that's really where we are with relationship management.
And how do companies do that in ways that don't leave people feeling manipulated?
So it's the mutual benefit. So one of the strongest, one of the terms that we use a lot is mutually beneficial relationships in PR. So how do we make sure that people feel like there's a mutual benefit when these companies are making billions of dollars and I'm still kind of broke? All right. So the way we do that is by doing things like giving back. So that's why you see a lot of companies doing a lot of community events, investing back into their communities to show that they're good corporate citizens. All right. So that's where that wave came from. Now, when it comes to corporate social advocacy, a lot of the younger consumers feel like brands should be speaking out on social justice issues. Okay, so now the brands are trying to meet that demand by giving them what they want. So that's how they're bringing balance, by bringing in their views on social political issues and also taking a stance and supporting those things and putting money and initiatives towards the things that their consumers actually care about, because that's how they're showing balance.
Yeah. So in my approach to authenticity and the disciplinary background I have, Irving Goffman comes up a lot and his work on impression management. And that's relevant to how individuals present themselves and really takes into account the expectations of our social environment and context. I'm curious if Irving Goffman comes up in your field at all?
No. So the funny thing about higher education in a lot of these subfields is there's not a lot of overlap. I actually, people always bring up this one class in grad school where the professor is a big name in Polycom, political communications, and he had this paper, and I was like, it was apparently groundbreaking, and I was like, it's not. They've been doing this forever in PR.
Yeah.
And he was like, well, no, that's what you can do. You can bring it to a new field and then it becomes a new thing. Right. And I'm like, but it's not a new thing.
Right.
So again,
and we call it translational science, I think is what we put the name on when we do that.
So in the research realm, especially in higher education, there are really these echo chambers and these little bubbles that people kind of stay in. And so we never hear about the people who are doing some of the same work right across campus, actually.
Yes. As it turns out.
Right.
I really felt that when I was in graduate school, I had a few years of overlap when I was doing my sociology PhD and my psychology PhD, and the sociology literature was just, people did not seem to be fully in touch with the psychological literature and authenticity, and even worse in the other direction with the psychology and social psychologists seeming unaware of what sociologists had to say about authenticity. Right. So it's interesting to hear that it's not just with sociology and psychology, but with comm, there's kind of an oversight. And so I love when meeting another authenticity scholar such as yourself, and the possibilities for collaboration, and how the things that you do can inform what I do, and what I know can inform what you do. It feels really exciting.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, so I want to ask you about the implications about what you've learned about organizational corporate practices for individual expression and presentation on social media platforms. So people talk a bit about like performative authenticity, and that we can kind of sniff out performative authenticity, and we're looking for the real authenticity, not the performative. And there are things that people do that make them be perceived as less or more authentic on social media. What do you think contributes to people being perceived as overly performative versus more genuine?
So in terms of everyday people, influencers, those type of social media users, it's really interesting because social media itself is a platform full of inauthentic behavior people. Okay, so they say that Instagram is a highlight reel. It's not showing people's real everyday life. Okay, nobody's putting their worst moments on Instagram. However, I think there are some elements that are still there when it comes to authenticity in terms of like how you show up. Okay? And even the effectiveness of influencers based on how they show up. So we see that the power of these like well-defined, curated influencers is kind of being diminished now, where people want realness. People want the everyday person, all right? Even when it comes to celebrities, for instance. There was this big push for the celebrities. They're just like us. Look at this.
Yeah, the ordinariness, I think, is the language I saw in the literature.
Yes. So look at Ben Affleck in Target. And I'm like, okay, great. Yeah, whatever. So really figuring out ways where you can still have control of the content, but still be vulnerable enough to expose yourself in a way that may be less than perfect. All right. So maybe my hair doesn't look the best today. Maybe my makeup is a little off today, but I'm still going to post it because this is who I am. Even the platforms. So a lot of people are more genuine on Snapchat, for instance, because they feel like it's a safer environment. It expires after 24 hours. You're in the moment. If somebody screenshots it, they have proof that you did it and they know who did it. So they feel like they can be more of themselves on that platform. However, Instagram has been linked to deceptive like-seeking behaviors and more narcissism, even in the literature. So think about ways that people can show up as their true selves on platforms like that are inherently seen as narcissistic and fake. And a lot of that has to do with not having these pretty curated platforms, you know, like not every day isn't a beach. Show us the rain. Show us the rain every now and then. And then I can feel like I can relate to you. All right.
That reminds me of a study I was reading saying that stories on Instagram are perceived as more authentic than posts. You're probably familiar with that as well. So I'm curious about the algorithms of these platforms. Can you say anything that you've learned about that in terms of brand consistency and those types of topics?
Yes. So the algorithm discussion is interesting because it's a loaded problem, because the algorithm rewards whiteness and curated content. You know, you jumping on a bandwagon. So if you use a trending sound, you're more likely to get more views, and the algorithm is going to push your content a little bit harder because you've jumped on this train. And a lot of times I may not have a video that goes with this sound. So sometimes it doesn't even match, you know? So that is really a problem that a lot of people are starting to explore. I don't know if you've heard of like algorithms of oppression, and how sometimes these algorithms have been trained by engineers who are not culturally proficient. And they tailor to whiteness, white content creators. And that's what ends up getting pushed further into the algorithm. That's who ends up going viral. And that has been a big problem that people have been trying to find workarounds for. So it's a little difficult. I think the algorithm actually makes it more difficult for people to be truly authentic if they are seeking to become viral.
Right.
Yeah. So if they are seeking to get a lot of likes, that like-seeking behavior, then they're forced to kind of
conform to.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about new challenges to authenticity that might emerge in the world that we are in. Let's talk about authenticity and AI for a second. What might you have to say about that? What are the big questions that you have?
The big questions for me would be, how do we measure authenticity, of course, in AI? Okay, now that AI is getting into the game field, or getting into the game, how do we then determine if a message is truly authentic if a robot created it? Okay, how do we still bring in our own voices into these authenticity conversations and into these scripts and into these written communications? Okay, so I've always prided myself. Is that a term?
Yeah, I use it.
Okay.
Whether or not it is or isn't, I use it.
Anyway, I pride myself on always bringing my voice into my writing, no matter if it's scholarly writing or if I'm just doing something creatively.
Yeah.
And so how do we bring our voices into that when we are supplementing with AI? Because sometimes you can get an output from AI and think, oh, that sounds really good. That sounds so fancy, but it's not you.
Right.
Okay, it's not in your voice. So how do we address that, and how do we make sure that we stand out from our competitors when it comes to our communication, or when it comes to people who are in the same space, especially in public relations and communicating for a brand? How do we bring our true voice into these automated systems? And even when it comes to relationship management, so many companies are jumping on the bandwagon to outsource customer service issues to bots. And we're still navigating the area where we're trying to figure out, when do they need to speak to a representative? All right, so now instead of yelling into the phone, speak to a representative, pressing 0 over and over again, we're now on the chat like, agent please, agent. And then the agent pops up with a name and a picture, and this is still not real. And so how does that affect the relationships we have with our consumers when they can't even get a hold of a live representative, you know?
Yes.
And are people okay with that though? Because we have post-COVID kids who connect better through technology. They don't want face-to-face communication. They get nervous, they get anxious. So some of them prefer to have a relationship with a bot, you know, or have communication with a bot instead of a live representative. So how do we navigate that space? I think that's something we're still trying to figure out.
Right. Do you think that social media will stay as compelling given that people, influencers, can generate content using AI? Or do you think we're going to hit a point where like people are just not interested since they're assuming it's probably AI generated?
I think social media will always be compelling because we have forced ourselves to only enjoy content that can be easily consumed in a short amount of time. And we are getting to a point where sometimes the audience doesn't care if it's AI generated or not. You know, we have people who are writing whole books using AI, which has its own ethical issues, but people are still consuming it. People are still finding it enjoyable.
Right.
So that is one of the things that is going to be interesting moving forward in terms of what's next, because I don't want it to be doom and gloom, but we've already regressed so far in terms of creativity and how we consume media and the type of media we want to consume. and also being inundated with so many different messages. So I do believe that it will continue to diminish some of our creativity and some of our desire to seek other forms of entertainment and gratification outside of what we're used to and what we're accustomed to. So, yeah.
It's going to be interesting to see how that all unfolds with AI.
Yes.
Wouldn't it be great if there was an AI research center where collaborators from different fields could come together?
Yes, that would be amazing. I hope somebody's coming up with that.
I hope so too. Yeah. We don't want to give too many spoiler alerts of things we're working on. But I'm really interested in whether people use the same variables to evaluate the authenticity of human-human relationships, to evaluate their relationships with bots and, with AI.
Yes, I am too. Especially, again, it's so different when you're in face-to-face communication. And it's so easy. Like, even when I go into classrooms, it's so easy for me to convey authenticity. But when I have to write something out, like, how do I know if they feel it, And even though I feel it and I think it's great, ensuring that message conveys through the noise,
Yes.
It's going to be really interesting.
This was a question I wanted to ask you a little bit earlier, but I've always thought of authenticity as something that we subjectively assess, that people... I know there's a lot of work going on right now about the perceived authenticity of others, but ultimately, do you think that we are the best judges of our own authenticity?
Oh, yes. Yes. I feel like when you are not operating in your true self. Yeah. Like I said before, and when I started in higher education, I was uncomfortable trying to fit the mold of what a professor should be, okay? And a lot of times that's an old white man. Okay, so I definitely had a difficult time fitting that. And so, internally, but you're trying to get one over on the other people, You're trying to ensure that it comes off as authentic, even if it may not be who you are. And so I think we are definitely the best judges of that if we're operating in that way.
I have a few little things to ask you before we wrap up, and one of them touches on that, and it was related to the idea of whether you feel that all people have equal access to being authentic, or if you think that people from more marginalized backgrounds might not have the same access to authenticity.
Authenticity is definitely a privilege. When it comes to operating in your true self, it really depends on your environment and how that influences your ability to do that. I tell people all the time, it takes a little bit of arrogance to be authentic in white spaces, all right, where the status quo is the norm and everyone is aligned toward whiteness. So to truly come in and be who you are, you're stuck kind of always feeling like the outsider, and you're stuck with people always trying to figure you out in a certain way. That really is taxing. Always trying to explain yourself, always trying to help others understand who your authentic self is, because it's just not enough for them to just accept it. Right. So it is definitely a privilege. It's super difficult to do, and it takes a lot of courage, especially in higher education. So higher education is a system that is kind of built to perpetuate whiteness, and it rewards whiteness. And so even the barriers that you have in terms of advancing in higher education will kind of have you in a space where you feel as if you don't conform, then you won't be rewarded, then you won't have a job, then you won't get tenure. So it is a risk that a lot of marginalized identities take in higher education. And it's definitely a privilege.
Yeah. I appreciate you giving voice to that. In my own work, I've looked at the mental health costs of inauthenticity, but with what you're saying, you're really putting a spotlight on what it takes, the differential cost for people from marginalized backgrounds to enact authenticity in spaces that don't by their design, reward
Right.
their authenticity. I think that's really important. Okay, 2 things I'm going to close us out on then. First, do you think we have an ethical imperative or mandate to be authentic? And then the last thing being any little hacks you have or tricks to stay authentic.
Yes, I definitely feel like we have an ethical mandate, especially as it relates to how we portray ourselves and how we show up. I think, especially with technology coming into the fold and really being such a big part of our everyday lives, we are the people who are going to push humanity forward when bots have become at the center, So really bringing ourselves and the authenticity that we have in terms of how we show up in these spaces is going to be really important in terms of giving ourselves somewhere to be, giving ourselves a place, centering ourselves in society as a whole. Because if we just step back and we continue to, again, reinvent the wheel, go with the status quo, we lose a lot of what makes us unique compared to those bots. We lose a lot of our own personal identity when we conform. So I do think we have an ethical mandate, and it's really going to affect a lot of us in ways that we don't even know when we are not operating in our true selves. In terms of the second part of your question, what advice would I give? Oh, be you. Be you. Somebody told me one time that nobody is better at being you than you are. And so when it comes to these shifts in technology and even in society, I never feel like my work is being threatened in any way, because I feel like nobody can do it the way that I do.
Right.
I can give them the exact recipe and I can give them all of the ingredients and it still won't taste the same. All right. Mm-hmm. So I'm not worried at all. So I think that is what we need to learn how to bring into the work that we do. Always bring in a piece of yourself, your authenticity, because that's what's going to make you different. When we're teaching everyone how to do press releases, what's going to make yours stand out?
Right.
When you are putting it into ChatGPT, what's going to make yours compelling? What's going to make your storytelling ability connect with the audience? And a lot of that has to do with you bringing in your authentic self into the fold. When everybody's graduating with the same degrees that you have, how do you stand out from the crowd? And a lot of that is about being authentic to who you are, because nobody can do that but you.
It's true. And I will say, as we wrap up on that note, that I talk a lot about pro-social authenticity, and I've been asked over the years, should everybody be authentic all the time? And I say no, because if your authenticity is oppressing others, don't.
Right.
I don't know if you have anything to add on that note.
Yes, definitely don't. Okay. Sometimes your authenticity probably should be a little bit suppressed. Okay.
Right. Rein it
so
in.
there are limits,
Right.
So also being respectful of other people is super important in terms of authenticity, and also doing that introspection to know that if what you are saying will cause harm to other people, have you considered other people in how you portray yourself? So yeah.
Right. This has been so informative. We could talk for hours, I think.
We could.
I hope we will.
Yes.
And thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. Anytime.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Being Authentic AF. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe to our series wherever you get your podcasts so that you never miss an episode. Until next time, keep being Authentic AF and let that authenticity uplift and inspire others. Take care.